Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, think about this for a second. Right now, on your skin, in the very air you're breathing, even deep inside your gut, there's this entire hidden world, just swarming with trillions of living things. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the invisible world of microbiology.
And look, these aren't just germs, They are, in a very real sense, the unseen rulers of our planet. They shape everything from our own health to the entire global environment. So yeah, let's go meet them. Let's dive into this vast hidden kingdom.
All right, first things first, if we're going to explore this world, we kind of need a map, right? We need to define what we're even talking about. So what exactly is microbiology?
Well, the name itself is a pretty big giveaway. Microbiology is the science that studies microorganisms. And what are those? They're just living organisms that are way too small to see with the naked eye. It's actually pretty simple if you break the word down into its Greek roots. So you've got micros, which means small, bios, which means life, and logos, which means science. Put them all together, and bam, the science of small life. And believe me, when we say this small life is everywhere, we literally mean everywhere. I mean, they're in the soil, in the water, on our skin, in our throats, you name it. They're absolutely fundamental to how our world works. But okay, with literally trillions of them out there, how in the world do scientists even start to organize all this? Well, it all starts with a really basic fork in the road.
Yeah, it turns out you can sort pretty much all of this microscopic life based on two fundamental designs. And this isn't just a microbiology thing. This division is at the absolute core of all biology. It all comes down to the type of cell they have, or if they even have a cell.
So you can basically split everything into two big groups. You've got your cellular organisms, things with a proper cell structure, like bacteria and fungi. Then you have the acellular particles, things that aren't really cells at all, like viruses. Let's tackle the cellular guys first. Okay, so within the cellular world, the first and simplest design is something called a prokaryote. I mean, these are the OGs of life on Earth. They're the oldest, most basic blueprint for a living cell you can find.
The best way to think of a prokaryote is like a super efficient one-room studio apartment. There's no separate nucleus holding the DNA, it just kind of floats around in the main space. No complex organelles, no specialized rooms, everything just happens in one open-plan area. Super simple, super efficient. Now, let's check out the upgrade. And that upgrade is the eukaryote. Now, these cells are the building blocks for, well, pretty much all the complex life you know and love. We're talking fungi, plants, animals. Yep, that includes us.
So if a prokaryote is that studio apartment, a eukaryote is a sprawling mansion with a bunch of different rooms for different jobs. It's got a true nucleus, which is like a secure home office for the DNA. It's got mitochondria, which are basically the in-house power plants. It's way more complex. Okay, so now that we've got the basic blueprints down, let's actually meet some of these microorganisms.
All right, it's time for the parade of microorganisms. Let's get introduced to some of the main players in this microscopic drama. And we're going to start with the one I'm pretty sure you've all heard of.
Yep, bacteria. These guys are single-celled prokaryotes, and they are without a doubt the most abundant organisms on the entire planet. I mean, they're found in just about every habitat you can possibly imagine. So to try and make sense of this massive group, scientists have a few key ways to classify them. You can group them by their shape. Are they little spheres or are they rod-shaped? You can group them by whether or not they need oxygen to survive. But honestly, one of the most crucial methods is something called the Gram stain. It's a lab technique that splits them into two big categories based on what color they turn.
First up, you have gram-positive bacteria. These guys stain a really deep purple color. And why? It's all because they have this thick, almost mesh-like cell wall that just soaks up that first purple dye and refuses to let it go.
Then you've got the gram-negative bacteria. Their cell wall is much thinner, so it just can't hold on to that purple dye. It gets washed right out. But then it picks up a second pink dye. Now, this might sound like just a color-coding thing, but for doctors, it's absolutely critical. That cell wall structure determines which antibiotics are actually going to work.
All right, next up in our parade, the fungi. Now, unlike bacteria, these are eukaryotes. That means their cells are much more complex, a lot more like our own cells, actually. And for the most part, they come in two main flavors.
So on one hand, you've got yeasts. These are single-celled, kind of round or oval-shaped. And then you have molds, which are multicellular and grow in these long thread-like filaments. And that thing I mentioned about them being similar to our cells, that can make fungal infections really tricky to treat. Okay, now let's get weird. Let's talk about the things that kind of blur the lines of what it even means to be alive.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, because not everything in microbiology is, technically speaking, alive. Some of these things are more like tiny biological robots that just lie dormant until they can get inside a living cell.
And the prime example? Viruses. These are the ultimate parasites. They're not cells, not even close. They're basically just a little bit of genetic code, DNA or RNA, stuffed inside a protein shell. And they have one mission and one mission only: get inside a host cell. See, they can't do anything on their own. They can't reproduce, they can't make energy. So what they do is they latch onto a host cell, inject their genetic instructions, and completely hijack the cell's machinery, turning it into a non-stop virus factory. But believe it or not, it gets even stranger than that.
Get ready for this. Prions. These are infectious proteins. That's it. No DNA, no RNA, nothing. Just a protein that's misfolded, that's gone rogue. The best way to think about it is like a zombie protein. It bumps into a normal, healthy protein and forces it to misfold into another zombie. This sets off a devastating chain reaction that causes horrible brain diseases like CJD.
Okay, so we've got this whole gallery of potential culprits: bacteria, fungi, viruses, even prions. So when someone gets sick, how on earth do scientists in the lab figure out which one is to blame?
Well, it boils down to a pretty systematic four-step process. First, they take a sample from the patient and they inoculate it, which just means they spread it on a nutrient medium, basically food for microbes. Then they incubate it, putting it in a nice warm place to let whatever's there grow. The next step is isolation, which is super important. They have to separate out a single type of microbe to get a pure culture. And finally, once they've got it isolated, they run a bunch of tests for identification to put a name to the bad guy and help figure out the best treatment. So after all that talk about infections and zombie proteins, you're probably thinking this whole microscopic world is just filled with things trying to make us sick, right? But is that really the whole picture? Not even close. We've talked a lot about the foes, but it's about time we met some of the friends. I mean, think about it. The yeast that makes our bread rise and brews our beer, that's a microbe. The bacteria in our gut that help us digest food, microbes. The mold that gave us penicillin, one of the most important medicines ever discovered, yep, a microbe. So you see, this invisible world is this place of incredible, mind-boggling complexity. It's a delicate balance between friends and foes, and understanding it isn't just about figuring out how to fight diseases. It's about understanding life itself.